So I will dive in. I think we've earmarked about an hour or so for me to share and talk menopause and talk AI moderation. And then I really do want to carve out, make sure we allocate a nice 30 minutes for some lively discussion. So I'll try to maybe make it under an hour. Um,
Okay, and I just want to add, if we could ask everyone to please turn off their cameras for now during the presentation, that just helps a little bit with the recording and the distractions. And Lauren will save all the questions that come in for the end instead of interrupting your flow.
Yeah, I will say, because I've given this talk before, if there is anything burning that someone is really not understanding or just, raise the hand, I'm
Yeah,
happy to pause. But for the most part, yeah, we can save it for that 30 minutes of lively, healthy debate. So yeah, I guess I want to start by just sharing how this came about. I'm fairly new to being out on my own. I'm about 2 years into to having my own business after spending my entire career at research firms and all of that. And I found myself last summer with in a very slow period, and I had really been uh, hearing murmurings of this thing, AI moderation. Obviously, I had been dabbling quite a bit already in AI in general, but the AI moderation thing hit me particularly hard in February when I was on a ski vacation. I'm getting off a chairlift and I see what seemed like a normal RFP come in on my phone, and it just happened to say it all. The whole thing looked really normal. We'd love to watch women use our product in their kitchens and all of this, and we want it to be AI moderated. And I had to read it about 5 times because in February 2025, AI moderation wasn't part of our normal we and insights, our normal thinking and zeitgeist. It was just barely being uttered. And I just thought, like, how scary and weird. And you're coming to me as human to deliver AI moderation. What does this mean? And what does it mean for all of us? And it was disturbing at first, and it sent me down a rabbit hole. And so I started to have discussions with, like, what if I actually could deliver it? What would it look like? And so at that point in February 2025, you could immediately get on the phone, on the other end of the phone, with the founders and leaders of these various platforms. I feel like at the time there were maybe about 8 or so. So I started having discussions and really exploring what this means. When I was really slow, I decided that I want to do an AI moderation project because you can sit through demo after demo and only get so much. It was really important to me to say, let's just, like, what does it look like, start to finish, the entire workflow? Not just because it's, when you think about it, it's not just AI moderation, it's all the prep before, all the analysis, what does it look like on the back end, and really get under the hood to understand what this could look like for us as a community, that this tech could be here and coming and encroaching or additive, and just all the questions. So with that said, I said, what better topic than menopause? Because menopause hit me like a ton of bricks and really impacted my life. And I feel like there are a lot of the conversation about menopause has evolved tremendously since I went through it pretty early and prematurely. And I just feel like the conversation has been dramatically impacted for the better in the past years, but there's still such a long way to go. So I wanted to explore how women think and feel and are talking about menopause at this moment in time. So maybe menopause itself could use a little bit of a reframe. So that was kind of the impetus behind why AI moderation and why menopause. Let's dive in. What I'm going to do is just talk about why, I would say in May 2026, even more so than February 2026, when I initially gave this talk at QRCA. AI moderation it's not even at an inflection point anymore. It is everywhere. It is everywhere. And we need to know, I believe that it's important for all of us to have a point of view as to where we stand and how we think and feel about it. And it is entirely fine to not embrace this thing. It is really, really important, though, to know about these capabilities because clients are talking about it, clients are asking for it. And I think we all owe it to ourselves to have a point of view on this. And so that's my hope, is that you can really see what it's like um, by the time we're done. And I want to just start. Today, we're going to hear from what it's like to go through this, certainly as a researcher. We're going to hear from participants, and we're going to hear what our community in leading up to February 2025, let's say October to February, what our research community, moderators, and not just moderators, but all parts of the qualitative workflow, how they feel about it. I need to just pause to say this really was a massive collaboration. I don't know if she's here today, but Vivian Harris, who is amazing, was my partner in crime on the analytical front. We used a platform called Glout. We had human recruitment in the mix, which you'll see in a moment. That was Tim at Qualbids, who's my near and dear trusted recruiter. He's fantastic. I had an agency, a healthcare ad firm, go and create concepts that I had kind of gave her the idea, but then I said, please bring these to life. And then, of course, Bello for the research community conversations to be able to have these one-on-ones, and Vivian and I both conducted those to really get a sense of what it was like. Everyone, and this was sort of what I teased a couple 2 weeks ago at MRxPros, this just came about so effortlessly. Because we were all just going at this in the spirit of learning and let's understand what this is. Everybody was so excited to just be a part of this. So I would shout from the rooftops, like, think about topics that you're interested in and talk to people you want to work with and just let that unfold. It was quite inspiring. Really quick in the chat, I did not prep Laura or Janet that we would do a poll, but just for fun, can you throw a number in the chat, just where you sit right here, right now, on this continuum of AI moderation? Not AI in general, not AI on the analysis front, but just this idea of enabling an AI moderator to handle your study or piece of it. Are you a never ever, oh, hell to the no, no thank you, versus you're all in and you're talking about it, you're doing it? So interesting to see these numbers and how they differ from where we were in February in San Antonio. Yeah, are you a side eye or toe dipper? Okay. Any other numbers? Just throw them all in. Just curious. See? Okay, beautiful. We're going to come back to that in a bit. So I wanted to spend a quick moment on what we designed. And the thought here, there were several goals, but I didn't want to do a study on human versus AI. That was not, I feel like there are a lot of very smart people who are looking at that and exploring that, and we need that, but that's not what I wanted to do. I was really curious about several things, one of which was how are women really, to what extent they're interested and willing to really share what's real and true and get into like all the things when it comes to what the experience of menopause is like or might be like. And I really wanted to make sure that I start to understand the conversation that I wasn't hearing when it came to AI moderation. I wasn't hearing anyone talk about the who. It's instead it was, should we use it or could we use it and what's it? But we all know that our research is only as good as the humans we bring it. And I wanted to understand, is there a meaningful difference between panel or versus human, what I'm calling a pure human qual recruited, more traditional recruit? And I want to hover here because this is so important. When I say panel, what I mean is an AI moderation platform that you might go to for an initiative. You come to them and they often have in-house sort of, I won't say in-house, you can tap their panel. They will go out and find, and you say, please find me 300 people. I want women, and I want 100 who are in peri. I want 100 women experiencing menopause, and I want 100 post-menopause. Panel is there. You can go out and find them pretty easily through your platform. You do that, there'll be like, as different than going to Qualbids and saying to Tim, I'd like you to find me X number of women at various stages in menopause, where he is going to hand recruit just like he normally would for a traditional qual. I just want to make really clear so we understand that distinction because it's important. I was really wanting to understand do we see meaningful differences in the engagement, in the quality of response, and at the end of the day, how they net out when it came to the different concepts? Second, I really wanted to understand, can these platforms really deliver sequential monadic for concepts because in a way that we feel good about? Because clients, if they're running this stuff, are going to have STIM. So can it capably handle STIM, and can participants see it enough and all the things? How is it on the tech and UX front? I also really wanted to understand just this notion of level of disclosure and all of that. When we have a potentially sensitive topic like menopause, how does that affect what we hear? This wasn't, massive, but it wasn't small either. So we had 101 panel participants. Those were sourced by Glout, the platform. We had 28, it was 30, but 28 full completed recruited, human recruited participants that Tim at Qualbids went and found. And we had 37 fellow researchers. So everybody went through the exact same Amy, and I'm using Amy as AI moderated interview. And 24 of those 37 spent the time to do a one-on-one afterwards to talk about how they felt. Just to be clear, generally speaking, I'm just going to go right here. The 15 minutes tends to be the industry standard for the sweet spot of how long an Amy or AI moderated interview should be. I think many of us who've talked about this in our space now know it is tough to really regulate, and it is tough to manage because participants can go on and on, but ours ran somewhere, I think our average was like 23 minutes. I knew it wasn't going to be 15, but the idea of really wanting to start off with the way we designed the discussion guide and the conversational flow was, let's talk in general about a grounding and how menopause has affected your life, your on several fronts, right? Everything from emotionally, physically, sexually, all relationships of all, like, it was very like everything that how menopause has affected you. And then I wanted to dive into the concepts. There were three that you'll see in a second, do a quick comparison, and then some reflections on what the experience was like. So it was a pretty tight conversation, and we started with total transparency. And we, in the recruit, it was, hey, you're going to be talking to a bot. And it was very clear, you'll see my exact language that we developed, but it was something to the effect of, prior to seeing this intro, it's like, there are humans who thoughtfully designed this conversation. There are humans on the front end, and there's humans who are listening to you on the back end. But for now, for this next 20 or so minutes, you're going to be talking to a bot. And this is, how we set it up. And I'm not going to read this to you, but just this idea of, we have two parts. We want to just explore your experience with menopause, and then your reactions to several ideas that attempt to reframe it. These were the three ideas. We had concept R, S, and K. I think we can all probably agree that they're rather testably different. Concept R feels very different, has a very different feel, as you can see, and we showed these full concepts. So we had image, we had language, we had some potential taglines, and all of that. So really just to bring an idea in fairly full form, which feels, again, very different than this S concept, and even still concept K. So I want to jump into the results and flat out just talk about the fact that at the end of the day, panel and traditional qual participants did net out in a fairly similar place when it came to which articulation of reframing menopause they resonated with more. That concept R did a bit better overall across both panel and traditional human qual recruited participants. And concept K was kind of among the least liked. So the net, if a client had to act on the data, the results were similar. So surface level, similar. And there's no question in my mind, all of us that Vivian and I definitely felt like, had this been a real study, we would have had tremendous rich detail and fodder for the concept refinement and how to move forward, which one to move forward with, or if they were to test how to optimize and test this quantitatively. There was no question we got a lot of richness around the overall message and the tone of voice and specific elements, what taglines landed well, what didn't, what was perhaps a little like sparked some negativity and ick. So we got it all uh, quite thoroughly. But what was really interesting, what we were really curious about is what's underneath all of that. Like what did and how did the quality of responses differ across our different audiences? So what we found what we found was that panelists were definitely more likely to respond um, via text, right? So, and that's not too terribly surprising, but our traditional qual participants who are used to being either in focus groups or online or doing boards or whatever, but they opted for voice. So when they talked about how it's affected them emotionally and physically and in all of their relationships, et cetera, they were often speaking their responses. And so in terms of method and what they chose, that like it's noteworthy because that leads to this next thing, which is that our traditional qual recruits were definitely more verbose and more detailed in their response. And that was actually regardless of whether they chose to talk or text. And I say text meaning type their response. I don't mean actual, although if they were doing it on a phone, they could have text. Um, so what you see here is a classic example of the difference. So if we look at our panel participant here, she's talking about, her symptom, weight gain, hot flashes, as different than what do we like this qual participant is talking about. When I heard the word, I described many symptoms, and she's going into like a lot of depth talking about that. So very, very like stark differences. But and sorry, one more thing. And another example of how panel responses were really just direct and short and sweet and concise in their responses. So if you look here where Amy's saying, and Amy is the glout pink little icon. So can you tell me more about how these emotional changes have impacted your life? And she's saying, I sometimes can't control my feelings when I'm around people and I cry at the drop of a hat. I often have to leave the room. She's saying, thanks. How has it affected your relationships? It has not affected any of my relationships. Good to hear. Romantic or sexual. She's saying sometimes it's uncomfortable. Can you share more about it? Sometimes it hurts and burns. And then, right. So what's interesting here is that she's concise, but she's going there. She's talking about that sex is uncomfortable, hurts and burns. Like, so what we found is that response length and the method that they're choosing to respond with doesn't necessarily predict the degree of personal disclosure, right? So panel and traditional qual recruits were equally likely to talk about potentially sensitive information, right? And so I no longer have the body I no longer know the body I now have, says panel. She's talking about I think my family likes me better now that I no longer have severe PMS. I'm like a ticking time bomb, never really comfortable. Um, Traditional qual talking about no desire to have sex and therapy now, mental health, and just so much to deal with. I'm contemplating. So both of them are going there. Um, and it, you know, there was a little bit directionally we saw that human traditional qual recruits were more open about some of the physical and emotional changes, but both went there without question. What we wanted to do is take a really close look at how Amy probed. And it's important to acknowledge that because of the nature of the three concepts, and we really wanted to get this done in as close to 20 minutes as possible, we set we relegated Amy to only one probe per question. So she's only got one real shot. Let's take a look. So the biggest challenge that we had is that Amy didn't seem to have this contextual memory to be able to carry and integrate and adapt. So she's saying, how has menopause affected your romantic or sexual life? And participant is like, I think I told you, like I already said that. So the the nature of how confined it felt by question started to be frustrating. And so we also saw that she misses opportunities to probe. So think about how we as a human moderator might have addressed this. How has menopause affected your romantic or sexual life? She's saying, I have zero sex drive, so that's hard on my husband. I understand. Have you and your husband been able to find ways to maintain intimacy despite these changes? And she gets the answer of yes. Remember, Amy only has one shot. So, as a human moderator, we probably might have said something more to the effect of, how have you and your husband, not yielding a yes no answer, but setting up that question in a much more productive way that we were likely to get something richer on the other side. And if Amy's only got one shot because of time, we've got to get those questions spot on. And anything that's maybe nonsensical wasn't good at picking that up. So this is just weird and awkward, and it didn't work here. So a human moderator would have been able to probably get underneath and crack that code. But nevertheless, we did find that Amy does show particular, there were moments where she shined. So when she's talking about husband, he's 43, I'm 58, 15-year difference. He could have it every day if he wanted to. I just don't want to. She's saying, it sounds like the changes in sexual desire have been challenging in your relationship with your husband. How have you both been navigating this difference in desire? So here she is asking a good question, and she's getting a good answer. But here's where we say there's no question that we unearthed a lot, right? And the elements within a concept. So when we ask, and she's saying, hey, are there any specific phrases or taglines that really resonate with you? This response, if you look at it just in the interest of time, she's saying, let me say, midlife isn't a crisis, it's your reboot. Yeah, I like that. But this isn't the end of youth, it's the beginning of youth. She's like, don't talk about the end of youth. I don't know. It's just, I mean, come on. It's not Perfume the Pig. It is the end of youth, and that's okay. Why pretend that it's not? You lose me on that second tagline. So this idea of really being able to make sense of that, and this as an example is a spoken response. So we can go in as the analyst, you can go in and really listen to how this woman is articulating that too, how emphatically she's like, come on, stop it. Like, this is the end of youth, and that's okay. Really important to us to get a sense of how participants felt going through the AI moderation. And it's so critical to note that in October of 2025, when these were run, 100% of our participants had never experienced what it was like to talk to a bot in a research scenario. They were all Virgin Amy, right? So I think that was important because, as we know, this technology is being deployed a lot. So there was a freshness to something like this. Most participants said that they would be at least as open in their sharing as they would have been with a human moderator, and all 28 of the human qual recruited participants said, absolutely, I would do it again. So this idea of the level of openness and sharing and vulnerability and all of that, it at least as open, so they say. What's important is to really understand some of the differences that and like where each of these audiences were coming from, right? So we got the same feedback from an open-ended question. So our 101 panel participants, it's critical to know that they were incentivized the way panel participants would be incentivized in the real world. They are coming in with a quant survey mindset because that's what they're normally served. As different than our traditional qual recruited participants, they are inevitably, we know they're getting a higher incentive, qual mindset. And keep in mind, we're talking a pretty big differential in incentive. We're talking about $3 versus $30 for a 20-minute conversation. So when we hear the way that they're talking about the experience, let's not forget that. And it's a lot of it is differences in their expectations, not necessarily differences in how they engaged. So here's what I mean. When it came to panelists, they define good as was I able to get in there? Like, did it work? Right? Was it frictionless? Like, did it feel smooth? And can I get in and answer it? It's like they're kind of saying, sure, it was fine, it was easy, it was quick. That meant it was a good experience for them. And in fact, not just good, you could argue it was much better than what they're used to. So this panelist said, I like the survey. It was very different from others I've done in the past. And Amy says, can you share more about what made it feel different? There were different things to look at. So, I mean, the stim wasn't bad. And asking me directly for my input instead of checking off boxes that sometimes do not apply. So this idea of she's clearly like her benchmark is taking surveys. And this way she got to, you know, someone was listening to her feelings about menopause, and it definitely was more engaging than a typical survey. For panel, when they said anything negative or when there was friction, it had usually something to do with, hey, like it felt like the probing was like they're used to sort of checking box and moving on. Amy did ask follow up, right? So it's like probing felt like badgering or it's too much effort vis-a-vis what they're used to. Or, again, that question, same question over and over, or it just felt like too much typing. Of course, they could have talked, but they chose to type. So that's where panelists surfaced friction when they did. Traditional qual participants, now remember, these are people that qualitative researchers might bring in, again, to focus groups, be it in person or online or other methods, of course. But for them, they're coming to the table and they're coming into this conversation valuing the ability to be emotionally expressive, right? To talk about how they're feeling about different concepts and ideas or menopause itself. Some felt they felt more comfortable opening up in this format than they would had there been a human potentially on the other side, sitting, listening, judging, maybe. And some of them really did appreciate that it felt conversational. And some had a heightened sense of comfort engaging with the bot. Also, I think, they had more like a qual incentive with the $30 for arguably 20 minutes. And, they know the difference between what this would be like, what this was like vis-a-vis what it would be like with a human. When they had something negative to say, wasn't often, but when they did, it tended to be about the platform's UX, right? It tended to be, oh, screen size, like I had to take a photo of, or I couldn't see the concept well enough, or, if they were navigating on a smaller screen, or in essence, that they had to do something to work around to get it to be able to really see the stim adequately. Or, something about like the voicing, but generally speaking, it was UX stuff if there was anything negative. But it's all about, at the end of the day, the fact that there's just different mindsets. Panelists tended to reward how easy it was, and qual participants were really about, could I express myself? Like, did it feel engaging? Was this like a decent use of my time? Yes, I'm getting paid for it, but did it support me in like talking about menopause and feeling so? Both, at the end of the day, both had a good experience engaging with Amy, but they had different bars and, again, different expectations and different ways of defining what good was. But let me just turn it over to them so you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to play this video, and I think sound should work for everyone. Oh, and just to be clear, these are the human qual recruited. So of the 28 or so who went through this is them submitting a self-capture video about what the experience talking to the Amy was like.
This AI moderated interview went really well. It was very smooth, and all the questions transitioned very nicely. I like that there was an option to type or speak. I preferred to speak just because it was more natural and I had time to think about it before pressing record and send. I think it was a really great experience and no tech issues whatsoever.
I liked the experience very much. You can think about it on your own and go through the concepts and then just answer it. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I didn't have to see anybody. So I thought it was a great concept. I actually have never done it this way before with an AI moderator. So I definitely did enjoy it, and I thought it was great and something I would definitely want to do again.
I think the experience of this survey was totally flawless, and I really enjoyed answering all the questions. And even though it was AI driven, I didn't face any kind of difficulties. So I was very open in the way I answered the questions, and it was a wonderful experience.
I honestly don't feel it really matters what topics I talk to a human or an AI bot about. I'm comfortable with all of them, so it really makes no difference to me.
I think I feel equally comfortable speaking to a human moderator and an AI moderator. I can't think of any topics that I feel like I would only want to handle with a human versus AI. The only thing, with a human, it does help to hear someone go, okay, yes, I understand, or can you elaborate on that? With a human, I feel like it's helpful to get feedback that what I'm saying is making sense.
It was an AI chat versus a human moderator. For a subject like this, I think it would be more profound to have an actual human moderator for this type of subject. For an AI chat, it'd be okay if, like, say, hypothetically, entertainment, everyday needs, and stuff like that. But I do believe that some topics need to be human moderated. Something personal like this, I believe, should be human moderated, and stuff, say banking, finances like that, I believe should be human moderated as well.
So mixed, definitely some interesting and mixed responses. So that was the participants. Let's take a look at what our Insights community felt and how we felt about going through this. So again, 37 or so took the Amy and 24 conversations. Qual researchers tended to feel like, while there may be some promise and some potential for it, it felt more like a verbal survey than a true qual discussion. So, and again, this was, think about October, November, December of 2025. And this was the specific study that they went through, right? So the way I set this up, it was quite structured because we had 3 concepts to evaluate. But they felt like it was probing wise, just didn't feel like it could get the kinds of probing that human moderators could. It felt the repetition and the redundancies in questioning were frustrating, and just that lack of, as I mentioned, that lack of context carryover, the idea that it didn't seem to have the memory as it evolved from question to question. So, and inevitably, like, there's some fear underneath all of this. As human moderators, I've felt a little bit of a threat, or at least I think going into this, it's there's no question there's some of that. But even though moderators or qual researchers tried to put on their participant hat, you can't help, it was inevitable that they'd say, I would have done it differently and compared to how I would have done this. But generally speaking, what we found is that it felt too sterile and transactional, right? It lacked the fluidity, it lacked that warmth and adaptability in the way that humans can, in the moment, decide to do something or express true empathy and to really pause and listen, and all of that. It couldn't compare. Which is why qual researchers tended to feel like it was underwhelming, again, more like a bulletin board, or, like I mentioned before, a survey, rather than a live qual discussion. And then also just this idea of, like, yeah, sure, it was kind and it was polite, but it didn't help me build on my thinking, which is something that human moderators often do. So the other thing is that inevitably, just that sense of, it felt too formulaic. that it left qual researchers feeling like it was just too survey-like. I will say, there are definitely platforms that are designed differently, or even within a platform, you can decide to let Amy be more adaptive rather than programmatic. For this study and doing what we set out to accomplish, it was asked to be more programmatic because we had to hit the sequential monadic and really go deep on the concepts. So it's important to just keep that in mind. Like, we designed the study in a specific way. But in essence, the limitations were as follows. Emotional intelligence, right? This is such a surprise, but Amy was not good at really detecting some of that tone or sarcasm or the emotional intensity. I know we have one woman here who participated, and she was angry. Like, she's like, I was trying to be a badass menopausal bitch. And Amy wasn't picking up on that at all, as you can see here. I love that you're here today. And so, just that idea of really getting underneath, and that words themselves, all Amy is capturing on the back end is the words themselves. Obviously, if a human goes and tries to listen to those that used voice, that opted to use voice to record their responses, the voice is there. But if we've got 100, 300, is the human really going to go back and listen to get that layer? Probably not. Weak recall. Again, this was definitely a problem, because it was like, come on, asked and answered. Like, don't ask me this again. And that's where it really starts to drop off and not feel like a real conversation. And again, same kind of related. I found myself, I just keep thinking, I already told you that. So a lot of this is related, but those were the aspects where it just felt like the tech needs to be better. The other thing is, well, let's hear it from them. Let's go straight in. This was our research community sharing how they felt about it.
I was very happy that I could type my responses because I like formulating the response and then typing it, and that made me feel in control. I did not like the way it probed me. It felt unnatural. It felt like it was programmed to probe every time I said something. I can see why for a sensitive topic, you'd want to test it out. But I'm thinking, for menopause, like, we want to have these conversations with other women that are going through it. We want to see like what lights you up and how do you feel? What were your experiences? And we want to go deep on this. Where like, I felt like I was staying on the surface because it was just, let me give it what it's asking. And I didn't feel that personal connection to it. So I'd have to really think about what's the right use case for it.
So I probably went in with low, like kind of poor expectations. I am trying desperately to keep an open mind regarding all the AI stuff. But, at the same time, it's like, come on, guys, like, they're like, this is what we do. Like, there's like some fear there too, as far as just, being replaced with robots or whatever. So overall, I was pleasantly surprised. It was a smooth experience.
I mean, there was questions around your romantic life.
I didn't elaborate. If somebody was probing me, I would have offered, the world, but I didn't. I did have a little bit of like, let me just not go super crazy here.
It seemed very, very sterile. It seemed like a bulletin board until I turned my sound on. This is the kind of technology that works for a very specific, very directed set of questions. I have 3 concepts I want to show you. What's good, what's bad, what's curious about them, what's not working for you.
I specifically used pretty strong language because I was testing it myself, and it missed the mark. I mean, there was a lot more I could have said. My fear is that they'll almost gamify it. Like, if I don't have someone to be held accountable to. Like I carved out 20 minutes to speak with Lauren, and I can just type answers, you're going to get wild statements from me. Absolutely wild. I will say outrageous shit because there's no accountability.
The AI moderation didn't really bother me, but it felt more like a survey than a connection with a moderator, but that was perfectly fine for the scenario. I really, really, really appreciated the ability to speak my answers because there's zero chance I would have been as verbose if I had to type all of them. It was easier for me to check out, disengage, phone it in, not try as hard than it was if it was a real person. Because about halfway through, I was like, I'm kind of done. But and it was easier just to be like, just to answer with AI because I didn't feel like I was letting AI down. Whereas if you and I were having a conversation, I would have stayed engaged longer and tried harder because you're there and I don't want to disappoint you by checking out halfway through. I think that
So a lot to unpack with those. And you hear that diversity of was starting with Layla, how she's like, I love the ability to text. And by the way, participants did say that too, where they like the ability to type, but then review their responses before submitting, because some participants are wanting to be really, really thoughtful. Or even better, if they could talk their response and then edit it before submitting. And so, but then you hear Jen at the end talking about how there's no way she would have divulged as much or been as forthcoming had she not been able to voice her responses. So lots of diversions there. And then Megan, of course, right? The concern about really like they're going to make no effort. They're going to gamify it. They're going to say it. So there's just a lot to think about and unpack there that I'm sure we'll talk about when we have some lively debate. What I want to do now is really just at the end of the day, think about what some of the ideal use cases are, should any of us decide that this is something we are either wanting to do or confronted with if you're not a never ever. So generally speaking, the consensus was among the 37 or so, like when asked how, if at all, might you think about using it, those who several, like you heard Betsy say, you know what, for tactical, really structured something, concept testing, message testing, this can work. It can work. There are several who are thinking, I actually could see using this for pre-work interviews to really get a sense of like go a little bit wide and broad, and then use this to potentially handpick those rockstar participants that you want to go deeper with in the human qual. There are absolutely instances where going to think about using AI moderation on the front end or back end of quant. Like there are use cases where it can make sense as a complement. At least that was generally what, but for specific, really well-defined research objectives, it can be viable. This idea of, as a qual participant said, I could totally do message testing with this technology, like today, here and now. But that idea of it lends itself when the goal is to evaluate and react to specific stim or idea concepts, but not this like loosey-goosey possibilities and wide open interpretation and white space. Like that's not the stuff right now that it's built for. And qual researchers specifically, when asked what would you want to see if you were to use this, like what are some of the solves that would need to happen? None of this is going to be a super surprise, but that wish list would be on the tech front. You know, it's that memory and the contextual intelligence, it's got to get better. Otherwise, it's never going to feel like a true conversation. And that idea of really, you know, generally speaking, AI is good at going in with direct follow-ups, but not at pulling back and seeing the macro and really getting a sense of bigger picture issues. And you know, in many ways, thankfully so, we still it's never going to be as good as humans are on that front. The other thing that was expressed, and this was both researcher, well, definitely researchers, some were thinking, hey, just some visual cue to allow participants to know that it's kind of there and listening. So whether that's an avatar or just, something pulsing such that they get a sense of truly like their responses are going somewhere and someone's going to be doing something with this, right? So that idea of and participants express this too, like I'm going to try harder if I know a human's really listening on the other end. So and the idea, I alluded to this a moment ago, this idea of potential like voice to text where they can actually speak it for many participants who want to just be able to talk their response, but potentially to edit it, because we know, especially human qual recruited participants really care about showing up for research and making sure they're really articulate, and there are those who really want to be meticulous with the feedback they're sharing. So the verdict, at least in February, and we can talk about this, in our lively debate coming up, is that, for now we can exhale, because sure, for fast and functional stuff, really tactical, it's all about speed, sure, but not for the good, deep, really rich stuff, right? It's just, I would argue that anything that has some emotional terrain is not fit for this. And the notion of, sure, at the end of the day, this is now, and I say increasingly so, it is here. It is a tool, but it's just not capable of yielding the depth that we know qualitative research can deliver. So for now, the idea of this not being something that can replace us, there's no replacement for that empathy and the contextual and all of that. But this tech is advancing. And so that's the thing that we need to, as an industry, I wanted us to really reflect on, it's at the end of the day, it's here, and there isn't any way of putting that back in the bottle. So what are the best practices? What are some of the ways that we can still be in the driver's seat of this technology? For some of us who are in that like three, maybe, it's just, we can think of it as a tool in the toolbox. But we need to impose our own like guardrails and standards. But as one qual researcher said, the train left the station, we just need to help guide where it's going. So I really want us to reflect on what this means for us. And in February, I feel like I hadn't heard this refrain. I feel like it's all over LinkedIn now. Everybody is talking about this. This is how it is affecting us, not just that the AI moderation is eating our lunch. It's about it. It really means that our role as researchers, we may not be asking the questions live as much as we were, but we still need to be in there to protect the meaning and protect the analysis and how stakeholders are interpreting results and all of that. We have to stay, because when this research is getting scaled and it's happening, and especially when we think about this democratization of research and everyone has access to it, and product managers and market, like they can run their own stuff, like we have to be in there watching, making sure that these beautifully polished summaries that exude a ton of confidence, like they don't necessarily, they should not be running with that. Like we need we need researcher minds on this stuff. So there's a difference that we need to think about. It's not just about in the moment, the live conversation that AI is conducting. It's about what happens after that in the analysis. And that's almost a scarier part here. So if you are entertaining the idea of it's not about AI moderate, like, should we, it's not, can we use AI moderation? It's absolutely a should we. So it's not a can we, it's a should we. So what kind of insight do you want to need? Like, is the client really, like, these are the things you need to ask. All of these questions, I'm just going to blow through them, but I want to hover at the who. It is really important, even though panel and human call participants netted out in the same place, I think you all saw that what's underneath that and that all of the richness and the texture, it's different. So if you can afford, your project can afford to get human call recruited participants, absolutely do that. There might be instances when panel is good enough, and I do think that it can be good enough in certain instances. I know we all cringe at the good enough language, but if you can do custom qual recruiting and take them through an Amy, I do highly recommend it. We need to just be thinking about those trade-offs for sure in terms of what it is, what happens if this goes wrong, if we completely, and I really, really, really think that we need to talk about hybrid scenarios where we might do the first 5, 10 human qual interviews and then unleash this thing on the remaining 50 or, in multiple countries and whatever. But to be there on the front end and to do some of these and then come back, like I think if a client has already decided that for budgetary reasons or whatever it is that they need to do AI moderation, I think we need to fight for that ability to do some before and the final 5 to 10 on the back end, to just because, and by the way, to pause in the middle. Don't just go out and do 300 of these. Like, check in after you run, a couple have been run. So anyway, really, really just figuring out what's going to happen to the analysis. So this is not about can we, it's absolutely should we. And I would argue the higher the emotional or strategic risk, the more human involvement is needed. So we need to make ourselves present even when a bot is going to conduct some of these conversations. So in terms of best practices and pitfalls, we need to think through this. Like, it's a different exercise. It's a whole different way of writing a guide. Just like an activity guide for a bulletin board is totally different, right, than live qual. We need to be really, really thoughtful about how we're designing this. So in terms of some of the best practices, I really do believe we want to start with human-led interviews first, then unleash AI if you're going to do this. We need to be really careful about reviewing that input, the early output to make sure, do we need to recalibrate? Are we getting also your LOI, your length of interview could be astronomical. We just don't know. So you need to be really mindful of that. So setting these check-ins, when you think about your sample size, like, don't just let's go get 100 people. I really think that there should be a lot of caution to pause and potentially recalibrate or adjust, and just making sure we've got that the human eyes, because the human judgment is where we come in to protect and guide the findings. So I think we just also need to make sure that just because there were long answers doesn't mean that they were better, right? It's not about quantity. Like, the panel participants went there and they were talking about how, just the uncomfortable sex and how they're losing them. So it's not about quantity, right? And the other thing is that it's really important. We don't think that more responses equals more learning. It doesn't. So we have to be really careful about the flattening. It is absolutely true that if we're not careful, and we don't have the ability, if you're doing, I don't love the idea of AI moderation that's pure text, because that's where the flattening can really happen. At least the ability to go in as the analyst and go back and listen to a handful of these and understand, like, when the emotion is there. Otherwise, it just pure text makes me, yeah. And we'll talk about video afterwards. I do think that there's a slew of platforms who mandate video. So let's talk about text versus voice versus video when we all get back on camera. But the importance of really crafting your mod guide really, really carefully. So you're telling Amy when and how much, and when you want to allow her to really go deep, because you can set those numbers of probes. You can also set her tone. You can, there's a lot of things you can do without necessarily going to the stream of having, creating an avatar, but you have a lot of control as you develop it. And then, transparency. Like, I can't say this enough. Like, I really felt good about this as an example and, just, hey, very much human, but you're going to be chatting with our AI moderator. So just giving them that sense, though, that not only confidentiality and all of that, but we're going to listen and look, and we're here. So I think that's really, at the end of the day, we know that what we season moderators are just, this is an art, and an AI moderator, it's not just about serving up these questions like following a script. We know that we get to decide when to zig and when to zag and when to not ask the question. So we're able to sense that contradiction. I know Tom, which is here, you can talk all about that, but to interrupt our plan and decide when not to add, just all of the things. Like, it's going to ask the question because it's been programmed to. So following those emotional breadcrumbs and to just come out of like, how many of us just we ended up getting these insights that just weren't even remotely on the agenda, and that's the part that is much likely to not happen when we decide that AI can lead these conversations. So if you're going to surrender it, some of that meaning is never generated, because if it doesn't happen in the moment, no amount of analysis will ever be able to recover it. So that was for QRCA, but I think we have time, at least 25 minutes, to start chatting about this. So I'm going to stop to share screen, but I am curious if anyone feels like their number has remotely shifted or gone up, gone down, like what, thoughts, and definitely open to taking questions, and let's have our healthy debate. I'm going to stop sharing. And there's probably a slew of questions that came up in the chat as well. So let's all come off camera and talk.
And we have a hand raised from Melina. If you want to ask your question, please, presence first.
Yeah, this is amazing. It's really interesting. I work B2B, and my company has an ingrown AI moderator, which I was actually I helped build as like, UX design, UXR part of it. And I think it's so hard to have these conversations because the technology is changing so quickly, right? That a lot of the elements that you brought up, for example, on the experience, which I thought were fascinating, the bot that my company is using has already found a way around, right? So that contextual part, the way that we designed the discussion guide to have the questions that the bot has to ask, right? Like our discussion guide questions, but we also design guardrails for the probes, right? So these are your probes, and you have to sort of get to this information. So it also manages that context where it's like, oh, you mentioned this before, right? So how about this other thing? So it's really interesting how the technology changes so much that it changes the experience, right? And for example, the bot that we use is all spoken, right? So the bot speaks and we speak, which also is it's a different barrier to cross, because then you don't have that. There's more engagement in it because it resembles human conversation more than the texting. So and I think the bottom line, it's really interesting how I'm feeling as a qualitative researcher, how the lines are blurring between development and technology and qualitative, where I'm getting a push where if I am going to master the usage of AI moderation and AI usage, I'm going to have to start understanding, for example, how the algorithm that drives this AI moderator, whichever one it is that you're using, is being designed, because I need to then design my guide in a way that matches, right, the algorithmic understanding of the knowledge. And so that blows my mind, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm almost 50 years old. How am I going to start understanding, right? How am I going to start learning that part of the business just to be able to do my part of the business? So yeah, I find it so fascinating how we're like constantly being pushed towards like that uncomfortable edge of where what we need to learn in order to be able to do what we're doing, if that makes sense. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that kind of blurring of the edges.
I am, and I'm more than 50. So but it's interesting. I participated in Lauren's the qual researcher, and I gotta say it was awkward to like the kind of questions were out of context oftentimes. And so Lauren, I love this presentation. I didn't get to see it at conference because I was opposite you, which was a bummer to be. But it's interesting that you saw sort of so many like common things on either platform. Um, but I guess it was so awkward for me that there wasn't the follow-up was I found myself almost wanting to help it. I don't know how to explain it.
Progress.
And I just wonder, because we do that already naturally as individual. I feel like the learning, like the more we program it to be like us, I'm just curious about it. I did see, this is sort of an aside. I did see something. It still doesn't click for me of how this is going to work, to be honest with you. But I did see I'm sorry, just really quickly. I did see something at Quarks that I thought was interesting. They're using AI as sort of a way for marketers to talk through research. And I think AI works really well that way, where they do a segmentation and then they fill the segmentation with a whole bunch of qual and quant findings that are pretty recent. And so that they could say, okay, I'm going to talk to Laura, and Laura fits one segmentation, and they can pop out some answers. It has to be monitored with certain guardrails, but I think
And
that's where
constantly
AI
updated.
thrives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And AI personas that are really built on proprietary research, all the data, and so that's very much a thing. The other thing is, I will say I've actually been doing, just for all of us, so we all know, it's not ready yet, but I've come up with a framework that I think will be very helpful for those who are confronted with or voluntarily like wanting to explore and do projects that harness some of these AI moderation tools. Like there are a lot of platforms. They are not all the same. They are not all some of them, there's just so much to consider, but I think I have a framework to really understand how to make sense of who's out there and which ones might be the best fit. So it's almost like a jobs to be done, truly. Like, what is your job to be done with this project? And if this, then you should engage with these guys. And there's lots of different also just, is it a subscription model versus ad hoc? I have found that most of them now are open to ad hoc, but and sometimes you want to be doing a study where you really do have video capabilities. And I will say, I think it was Milena who shared earlier. I do think that the tech is getting better, and even the platform that I used has not only evolved, but also, again, was restricted. There were definitely some handcuffs that I imposed and put on the Amy because of the nature of this study that in the way I designed it. So, and there are platforms that are much more conversational and fluid. That's sort of, I have several like new sort of research on research ideas that I have. And I do think that, a lot of them are open, but some of them fundamentally are a little more programmatic and quant-like in nature. And some are more open-ended and just, I'll almost call it open-ended and fluid, and a little more generative in their ability to kind of like watch and see where the conversation goes. So
I think like Pam and Melina had both brought up, there's almost going to be like a new skill set that we have to develop in learning how to think about sequencing and probes and how to phrase things differently than what we're used to doing, much like quantitative researchers had to learn how to write questionnaires in a different way when they were getting programmed into a platform as opposed to knocking on the door. And I just think some of your original skill set is still going to matter, of course, but there's other skills that we have to layer on top, because and then every platform is going to be different. So because you have experience on one platform, as soon as your client says, but we have to use this because we're partnered with them, it's a new learning process. I want to do something only because I feel confident here with all of you. I want to ask Chris Hawk if he could answer a question related, if you're willing to come off mute, Chris. I know that you, in the not so distant past, you moderated a men's group to talk about a topic that was sensitive for men, and it was understood from the client and the commissioning person that a woman wouldn't be appropriate for that, to talk comfortably with men about men's issues.
True.
So do you think, and this is big because we don't know, but would this platform have helped with that kind of a thing? Or did you feel like
So the thing that happened in those groups was that, and this is probably more specific to men than women, but that the men in the group, there was 8 per group, had really not had anybody to talk with about these topics. So it was male incontinence. The thing was, they didn't have other men in their lives to speak to. That, like, I have this really deep, long-term men's group that I've had since my kids were in kindergarten. And so, I'm used to having 20 guys that care about me and that listen to me, and that I do the same for them. So we have that deep connection of regular conversation about hard-ass stuff. None of these men that I had in the group, and any of the groups, had any of that. So, I mean, I had men break down and cry. Others hug me and thank me for this is the first time they've ever been able to talk about this. They live in a household full of women. It's all her friends. I just work, kind of thing. That it was amazing to me that other men don't have connection, but this would be the opposite, right? Like this would essentially not be the connection they were looking for, and so they wouldn't give a lot, I don't think, in this circumstance.
Which is the exact opposite of what Lila was saying in there about how she wanted to share more, and these guys haven't had that opportunity. And she's like, I'm not getting the regular feedback that I'm used to. Like, we really want to pour out our hearts. Fascinating,
Stacey,
Lauren, how you've uncovered these differences.
Definitely. And the way that Stacey said, she withheld, like she answered the question, but didn't offer anything beyond that. And I think that's part of the question here. And that's why I think we're going to see differences in, like, the who is just so important. I think we talk about the what here, but it's like, you got to think about the who. And that's the part of the conversation that I just wasn't hearing. Because we know how much it matters in the other stuff, and I think it's easy to just skip over that part.
We know how much it matters, but I think, like, clients often don't know this. So when we're getting briefed, like your example, Lauren, and what I just asked Chris to unprompted share, the clients don't always know to brief us or prepare us for that stuff. We just got to find the wiggle room and work with it when we're in there. Helen, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I also, just building on that, it was really insightful for me, Lauren, when you were talking about the different types of participants. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that the AI tool is picking up more of those panel researchers than the traditional qual. And then based on the discussion we just had, I think we need to be thinking more and more about segmentation of qualitative research participants and motivations for participating. Because to Chris's point, with topics like that, and some of the research that I've done, people are coming to those groups as therapy as much as they are for research, right? And then you get the people who are just doing it for money, who tend to be the panel ones, and there are a whole range of motivations. And I think we need to get much more sophisticated in thinking about what that segmentation is around motivations for participating beyond, the actual research, the recruiting criteria for the research.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I just want to say, like, a human moderator can take an average, I'm saying average, like lightly, an average participant, and still extract something, or even a bad part, like, and still, it's like pulling teeth, but we know we can do it. Like we can get something. But an AI moderator has no ability to get more out of a mediocre participant. So that's another thing to think about too.
There are
And,
so many things to think about. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. This was really good at prompting. Paula, what is one of the things you're thinking about?
oh, you're on mute. Can't hear
Paula,
you.
we can't hear you, but you appear to be off mute. Maybe mute and unmute.
Shoot.
Let's see.
Still no.
Okay, try and fix your mic, and we'll hop over and see what Maripuras has to ask, and we'll come back to you, Paula.
Hi. Thanks, Lauren, for this. This is great. I have like 2 points because what's happening now is that we're bidding projects and we're not being asked to be part of the conversation of the methodology. So it's basically the companies are making the decision, or they're buying credits, or they're making these arrangements with these companies, and it's great. It's like, okay, well, I'll get 200 responses in 24 hours, and so the mediocre doesn't matter because I would have talked to 24 people in a normal call. So my question is here. Because now, like now, instead of getting a request for do the moderation and the recruitment, is like, this is going to be an AI moderated project, so all I need you is to recruit participants. And I am having to kind of decide, it's like, do I want to be a player in that type of space? Do I want to, like, support it? And it's just, I still don't have an answer for it. But I think that's the concern that I have, is that we are being excluded from being part of the solution. And I'm worried that they're not going to, they're going to look at this as they do an online survey. We're going to get more open-ended, and they're going to treat it like everybody's quality. We're trying to rebrand it, but everybody says it's qual at scale. It's not qual. It's just, you have a large open-ended data set with probes.
I fully believe qual at scale is just better quant. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's not always
Yeah.
even better.
Yep. All right. Right. Well,
Yeah, so
yes.
what are your thoughts as to how can we get into this conversation? Because, we have these tech companies doing these great array, and we have a lot of investment from all of our clients. Basically, like they want to explore and invest in it. How do we become part of the solution instead of being squeezed out?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to be able to surface for clients what the risk and the trade-off is. But I also think that at a certain point, for some of that tactical stuff, it's like, you know what? Fine. Fine. There's like, I think really acknowledging, I think it forces us to become more strategic and just better at what we do. We have to, because there's no way that AI can do some of the more elevated thinking in the way we can be in the moment. And also, like, when there's just even a lot of stim. So, I do a ton of packaging research and stuff. And so, yes, it can serve up some concepts and deliver probably even a complex rotation. But, when we know we've got, like, there's still going to be, I really believe it's not, I think the nature of how we work is shifting. It must shift. I mean, and again, this is even just AI in general, right? But AI moderation also, there's certain pieces, certain types of projects that we're going to see less of. We are. But that then let's force us to be even better and just remind clients of the value. We just have to lean into the part that we know we can do really, really well. But also, like, even if they're going to do AI moderation, I still think, Mari, you can have a piece of, like, who's protecting that analysis, who is going to be really, really right, and and what are you, who's designing and setting all of the, calibrating the AI before, again, we unleash it. So I still think even when it's an AI moderated project, I still think we could offer value to clients. And that depends on the kind of client. Like, is it a researcher, who's really doing it? So yeah, but it's impacting our lives, no question.
Yep.
No
And
question.
Cynthia asked a question in the chat, but I'm guessing since she raised her hand, I don't need to read out the question from the chat. Go, Miss Cynthia. Adelante.
Hey, gracias. Well, actually, it has to do also, Lauren, with what you mentioned about protecting the integrity of the data. When we are moderating, we kind of know when someone is lying, or we can identify consumers that are not the segment or the profile that we are supposed to be interviewing and so on. But all this, when AI is really involving so many other people, how do we protect the integrity of the respondents, and how do we skim through responses that we know that are fake? How can we realize whether they're fake?
I think, Cynthia, I think the first thing, sorry to interrupt, but I had seen so I thought about the answer. Number one, I think it depends on if it's panel or human qual recruited. Because if it's human qual recruited, generally speaking, I know that all 30 of those people are completely, I've either done video articulation with them, or I trust my recruiter implicitly. So I know I feel good about the human qual recruited. So it's just when it comes to panel, what I can say is that I think all of these have what's called uncooperative responses. So anyone who is just taking way too long, or just talking gibberish or typing gibberish, they're called uncooperative and they are booted, and you as a researcher are not paying for them. So you're only getting completes, but I feel like panel is a mystery. It's a black box or whatever color we want, but it's not one that we have control over. And that's why if the stakes are high, you want to try to opt for human qual recruited, but remember it's going to be more costly because we know we have to incentivize differently. We want to incentivize differently. But yeah, I think it's a risk, but I'm not concerned so much about the bots, because I think we absolutely can do things to make sure they're not bots. But as far as someone misrepresenting and true fraud, AI is definitely not going to detect that.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking about, if you ask a question and I don't know the answer, or I'm just lazy enough, I just type that question in ChatGPT and read the answer. So it's not my answer, right? But it still might seem like it's feasible. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, in the era of democratization of research, even if we use panels, people might not feel so comfortable. Not all demographics feel comfortable doing research with an AI moderator, right? So just keep in mind that we might have to work extra hard to really make sure that all the voices that matter are included in this research, and maybe have some hybrid format where we can make sure that we include all those who are not as comfortable with AI moderation, responding well.
I will tell you also, I think for all of us, real quick, I think designing studies, and I want to test this, but designing studies with a truly like a choose your own adventure. First of all, no matter what, being super upfront that this is going to be an AI moderated, like you're going to be talking to a bot, making sure that they're opting into that, number one. But then, hey, do you want to type text? Sorry, do you want to type, talk, or be on camera to express yourself? And so I think that some of the studies, if we mandate video, we are going to see much higher drop off. I think I think the number is 4 to 6x. You're going to lose people. And, but if you mandate video, like, do we potentially just throw them a little extra, if the incentive is going to be $30, but it's, for an extra $10, if you're willing to have your camera on, we'd love that. So, they'll get an extra $15 for. So I think if we know that we want to be able to really have that emotion and deliver a highlight reel to our clients at the end and all of that. So I think there are ways I want to see about when I think about the participant experience. Look, we know that a lot of participants like talking to a bot. They're fine with it and maybe even like it, and some prefer it. But let's let them have a little control over how they're interacting with it. And I think that'll help. And the other thing, you guys, we didn't even talk about is like B2B, right? And B2B audiences. And there's something to be said that I think B2B recruiters are a little bit bullish about using this because we know how much friction is involved when it comes to recruiting B2B. And but then we're talking about really sometimes hard to reach and sometimes very, very costly audiences. So if you're spending $1,000 on an incentive, like, or if you're going to spend $1,000 to get this very senior, very hard to like, or do you want to put that person through? Do you want that interaction to be with an Amy, or do you want it with a very experienced B2B researcher?
Yeah, and we're going to wrap here in a second, and I want to give Paula a chance if she got her microphone working. But I think what Madi asked and Cynthia asked makes for an interesting conundrum. And Lauren, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. But if clients are going to use this for large quantity stuff and use one of your examples like the sorting, whatever, that's where some of this fraud can come in because you're not looking at 12 people like you would have in a in-person situation. And so that fraud question of who's getting in and how do we detect them and everything, one, we're going to have to get better. We're going to need new tools, but that's going to be a lot easier to sneak those in if clients start thinking this is a great way to collect a whole bunch. So I think it's really interesting. Paula, I could see you a second ago, and now I don't see you on my screen. Oh, you're unmuted. I can hear you.
Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yes.
Please ask away.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lauren. I think the discussion was great. And I'm right where I think most people on this call are. This is an excellent replacement for open ends. Excellent replacement with, to build into our quantitative projects. And I think really the understanding is if there's anything that is emotional in any way, shape, or form, then this isn't the tool for it. Like if you really want to understand kind of, really get that human element, that this may not be the best way, using an AI moderator may not be the best way to go. And I love the idea of when people come, to you as a qualitative expert to do AI moderation, I think you figure out a way to say yes. And the way I do that is I start with in person, then I, do some AI, then I have a midpoint where I do in person again, and then I wrap it up with in person again. And so it's a yes, and this is how it works when I provide you with that. But it's, in general, I don't think it's going to work very well to just do AI moderation by itself.
I think the reality is though a lot of clients, especially those who have to DIY, who are, I say have to, but who DIY so much of it, there's the ecosystem that exists now. What I'm starting to see is that it's not just that there's a couple platforms here and there, some AI moderation platforms. Some of these platforms are building full-blown, truly like deep intelligence for some of our clients where they can do AI moderation is but one of a much broader, they can just come in and do this. And it depends, if you have a super locked down insights team who is mandating that it's like insights team controls everything versus organizations that are much more open where, yeah, product can go and sort of order up or engage and get their stuff run. And, in a democratized organization, it's just these tools are building out to do way more than just AI moderation studies here and there. They are. It's pretty. It's like but one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and so we have to be mindful of these clients. Who maybe were DIYing some things but not all. It's changing rapidly, and these entities are going for a lot more than AI moderation. That's what I'm starting to see and hear.
Yeah.
And that landscape is changing, and that's a big deal.
I think that the whole idea that this is not an either or thing, that, and much to what Paula, alluded to and what other people have said, we can create hybrid approaches that include this tool. this kind of reminds me of all the conversation that went on years ago about online bulletin boards, where, we had certain clients who just instantly went completely over to bulletin boards. And it took them a while, some of them a very long while, to figure out that, yes, bulletin boards actually are a pretty good tool, but they don't do everything, and some things they kind of suck at. And they started slowly coming back. And the way that we spoke to those clients is by saying, yes, bulletin boards are a good tool. Let's use them where we can. Let's fit a bit of bulletin boarding into this upcoming study. But, I mean, you can't be the old guy on the beach yelling at the ocean, but at the same time, you also don't have to completely surrender. Not that there's anything wrong, by the way, with being an old guy on the beach yelling at the ocean.
Cynthia, do you have a...
Cynthia, your hand is up. Did you have a follow-on question, or is that still from before that you just, there you go. I wasn't sure if you were producing a lot or just very insistent that you not get left out. We've run over a little bit. I don't know if Lauren still has a couple minutes if some people want to linger and ask questions. The chat was on fire. We've already started spitballing ideas for a new kind of research that is nor qual nor quant, but some new hybrid. I have to say, Lauren, from one of your early slides, it was like a gut punch to me and an duh moment, both at the same time. But when one of the respondents said this was better than a survey, and I was like, of course it is. But that was the frame of reference. And of course, if they're being brought in by panel, but I think we have to think about that when we talk to clients, which is what you were just alluding to now, is the conversation changes about what are you actually buying. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, moderation, I think, is the wrong word.
And from being someone from the client side, when I was whether it was at McDonald's or Paramount, we weren't doing all that much qualitative anyways. When I was doing qualitative, it was because I needed qualitative. And when I was doing DIY, it was more likely to be some sort of quantitative tool, and the open ends weren't very rich. And so it really is improving your, what you're doing quantitatively. And so, but that's just being hopeful that you're working with clients who are wise enough to understand that this is not in any way, shape, or form a replacement for calling a moderator.
Okay, anybody that has a client that wise, hold on to them for all you got.
Yeah.
But also to I think still fight to be a part of it, right? To still let me just help guide it and oversee it because I've run, right? So just do one of the, and then you start to just become capable of shepherding some of these because, frankly, there's a lot of clients who I think have now the power to just launch a bunch of AI moderation, but they're not necessarily going to be designing it as thoughtfully. So yeah, there's a lot to think about there. But I also really think that certain things, like if a client is looking at talking to men on erectile dysfunction, I think those men would be a lot more comfortable talking to a bot. Obviously, their therapy session still, to Chris's men's group still has a place, but I do think that, those are the kinds of studies that would be pretty perfect for it.
Yeah. But I think even then, it's what are you trying to get out of the study? I think if you're trying to get an answer out of the study, then that's fine. If you're trying to really kind of deeply understand any emotions behind anything,
100%.
So it doesn't matter if it's shampoo or, incontinence, which are, two very different things. It just depends on if you're trying to be a little bit more functional. I think functional, you can use this kind of AI moderating a little bit more than if you're trying to go deeply emotional.
What is the research job to be done? 100%.
Yeah. Paul, I'm so glad you got your microphone fixed. We've got a question from Priscilla as well.
Yeah, I just saw it. Yep.
About other languages. And I don't know if Isabel has had experience with that or not, but please go for I'm curious.
Yeah, so not having personally conducted any overseas, I know that every platform, I haven't encountered a platform yet that doesn't say, we're capable of doing fill in the blank 50 languages, 100 language like so I can't vouch for them, but I do think that it all just depends on that level of, translation and how literal and so that I think the jury's out on what level of good the AI moderator is. So I don't know, but I do know this stuff. These conversations are getting scaled globally quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
I will just add that while, yes, everybody says they can do it, and my language is the one that's always at the top of everybody's list, Espanol, but there's a lot of reticence in Latin America anyway about, do they really get us and our sarcasm and our slang and our way of saying or not saying. Sometimes, it's the part that's not said that's hanging there, and a live moderator would get that. And so there is a fair amount of concern. Not that the translation won't be right, that's its own separate issue, but more the context is going to be missing.
Yes, I was thinking that maybe
I did research a pilot study with the U.S. Hispanics and the Mexicans in Mexico, and the issue was similar. I mean, with that Lauren discovered, for sensitive subjects, they didn't feel an emotional connection and build trust with the AI moderator in order to reveal details of how they use AI for healthcare, which was my topic. So the thing, what you are saying is exactly what I discovered, that for sensitive topics, it's going to be very difficult for Latinos that are used to connecting emotionally to share their truths. So a hybrid approach might be necessary, not just AI moderation.
I think that's really interesting, because I think there's like the layer of like the language translation, like accuracy or whatever, and then but there's also like what you say, Isabel, the cultural piece of it as well. And then I can say like kind of when you talk about like the Hispanic or like Spanish speakers, maybe they would like more like kind of expressive verbal connection. Actually, I'm thinking I've lived in Denmark, like Scandinavia. Their culture is more the opposite end of the spectrum. I wonder if that will be then more suitable for certain cultures, right? But I think my question was more just like language wise, kind of foundationally, because we know like AI, a lot of the training materials for AI is like, in English. So there's a hierarchy in the languages. And I think, Spanish or Chinese, these are like bigger languages, more popular, but what about like the more minor languages?
I tested
like
two
less
different platforms that are recognized as good platforms. I use them because they were very well recognized in a course I took, but both performed well in English in the course, but they didn't perform well in Spanish. So I will say, just to be safe, go with platforms that have been in the market for a while, that have had time to develop their capabilities in other languages, and please test them before you hire them in the language that you will use.
But besides language, I would also caution about preventing the flattening of the information. Because yes, if it can be, done globally at scale, yes, I mean, language-wise, they will answer the questions. But are we getting the texture and the richness that we have from culture? That's my bigger question, I think.
Well, you can do a hybrid approach, just like we do, with diaries and interviews and
yeah.
Yeah, I was even just thinking like, like I moderate a lot in Cantonese and Mandarin. Mandarin may be more popular, but like Cantonese, I'm like, can AI even do Cantonese moderation, or how good is it even in the translation and how they probe and like all that stuff? So even just the language part, not talk about the cultural part.
Yeah, I would imagine that all the platforms would, they'll give you an answer and they'll tell you yes or no. But I think, to just be able to demo it ahead of time and pressure test, you absolutely should be able to. I also think even I'm really curious about doing just a choose your own adventure where offering like you're going if like getting a client who's willing to go on board if it's not a research study, but a client who like let's just serve it up and say, do you want to talk to a human or do you want to talk to a bot? This is the topic.
Yeah.
It's the same 30 minutes. It's the same hour or whatever it is. But truly, I think this choose your own adventure thing is a really interesting experiment that I want to run.
I
And
was actually thinking the same thing too. Yeah, like giving that
yeah,
choice to the participant.
I
Yeah.
think there could be, there's implications like potentially, what do we do about incentive and obviously the cost implications, but yeah, I think there's quite a bit to explore there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and Marty has another question. Marty,
It'll be
earlier I made your name compound like everybody calls me Laura Bright like it's one word, and I called you Marty Puras like it was one word. But
Oh,
Marty,
no
please.
problem. I'll accept it. Thank you. Just, to continue, like, I just participated in a 2-day event on AI meets humanity here in Puerto Rico. And Yogesh was the keynote speaker. It was amazing. One of the issues with languages, and especially with Spanish that we have, is that we have about 26 different Spanish is not just, 5 countries. It's, like 6 different countries with, there are dialects. Puerto Rico uses a lot of slang, a lot of Spanglish, and it doesn't work. Like it's not going to be able to translate. So as we mentioned, it's very important to maintain someone who's very culturally relevant and with the language to be able to understand and take part. But AI still is not there to be able to discern like all, the Spanish and AI, like in general, this was something Yoga shared, is Spanish neutral. So it's not like
And nobody speaks
Mexican,
Spanish neutral.
Univision.
Oh, wow.
Typically, well, it's the most, but it's going to be geared towards it's biased based on how it was trained. So I think that's something we need to know the bias within the just in general. And I think what we see from the transcripts that we get from the video, that's what AI has to work with. So I think it's important to know. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thanks for the extra time. This has been a great
Yeah.
conversation. And as I mentioned, I think we have to kind of identify what would be as a group of qual researchers, what would be those presentations, studies, that the hybrids that we'd like to present to kind of propose to the industry in general. This is a way of doing it. Because they're testing and they have a lot of pressure and incentive from these VC companies and all these technology companies on, hey, try out our new technology. But I think we need to bring in the methodology because I know that on the client side, they are not the people buying and working with insights are not experts as they used to be when I started, that you had to have statistics and you were like a PhD. And I mean, no, they don't know. They don't know how to discern the difference. So
Yeah, and that's the thing. I really encourage us all to, if time permits and you can, pick something, a topic that you're passionate about, that you're excited about, that you'd want to talk about. I mean, I still have yet to barely scratch the surface on the menopause specific findings of this research. I've spent, most of the time so far just talking about the methodology and kind of what you saw here today, but I'm sitting on top of some really wonderful menopause data that I want to get out and soon and share with people for whom that could be meaningful. And so yeah, pick a topic, and there's a lot to explore, and these platforms are definitely also willing to just hold hands and do this. I mean, Glout they were really a wonderful partner, and they were so objective. They did not in any way attempt to influence. You just saw, I did not come out and say, "Oh my God, it's amazing!" Like, was very. I felt very free to like learn what we learn and share what we learn without any sugarcoating. And they and others will be, they want to run these kind of experiments and initiatives to understand what works and all
Lauren,
that.
I hope some in-house research teams are open to hearing your presentation. I don't know if you've approached any of them yet, but it would be really somebody raised it earlier, but I do think it would be interesting to put it out there to 5 or 10 of them and see how many say, oh, yes, we'd really welcome this perspective. We are
Yeah.
playing with it. Anyway.
Yeah. So in-house and client in-house. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. And actually it was, yes, there's a woman in Seattle who I know was like, I wanted to bring you in for a lunch and learn. And yeah, no, that's the thing. There's no question. We can't stick our head in the sands. I think we all, if nothing else, to be able to have an informed point of view about what this is and what this isn't, I think that's important. And that's my goal, is to just sort of say, and it was nice, I didn't just talk to eight humans and eight like there were some numbers here, some fairly rich numbers to be able to reach some interesting conclusions. So
yeah, no, you definitely got the broad spectrum and all kinds of fascinating insights. It makes me think back 360 moment when we were waiting for people to sign on. Tom asked me about going between metric systems and English for measurement. And I was saying, liquids and better and temperature, but not distance. And somebody in the chat actually gave me the formula for distance, because I was like, I don't know how far 53 kilometers is. Yeah, I know how to look it up and calculate it, but I don't have a sensation of how far that is. Like some of the others, I can perceive it in both. And I feel like that's what this is about now. Some of this, we can't perceive it in the AI world because we're used to the in-person or on Zoom. And now we have a whole new layer that we have to fold in and then help clients understand what those trade-offs are. And it is developing a whole new skill set.
Yeah, it's true. And then when I talk about and sometimes use this word surrender, that idea of like, if we're going to surrender something to AI moderation, I use that word because that's the thing. It's like when you're living and breathing and live with people, whether it's an IDI or a focus, it's like it's head to toe. You have to process it. You're present with them. And when we let AI do that and conduct the actual sessions, it's that onus. That's where the aftermath in the analysis happens. And that's where it's like, if we are layer upon layer, step after step removed, that's where it gets dangerous. And that's where we know that client stakeholders are like, ooh, let's see the summary. Let's go.
I agree with you. I had that experience in analysis tool. I'm sorry, Vashti, I know you've got your hand up, but I think it was interesting, all the English sessions, and I was either present or running them myself, and then all the Middle Eastern ones in various languages from the Middle East. I didn't have any relationship with the creation of the data or understanding it firsthand. And I entirely had to surrender the analysis or my understanding of that data to the tool. And it was a totally different experience for my relationship with that data and my knowledge and my intimacy with it and my awareness of it and the meaning of it, most importantly. And
yes,
so I feel this is similar. As you say, I think surrender is a great word, Lauren, and I think you capture it with that. And there's risks with that for sure. And surrender
really are risks. Yeah. Absolutely. Vashti, go for it.
Vashti, turn off your mute. Come on.
So I'm working in my garage in the Texas heat, and I've been listening in this entire time. So I'm not like in my office right now, like I usually am. I'm in my garage. But kind of building on what you're saying about surrender, that's kind of where my head was at in the analysis. If you've been living and reading the research, you've been in the room with respondents and all of that, you understand like not just the deeper meaning of the findings and kind of what, the emotional resonance of it and all of that perspective and context. You also understand like the limitations of it, because clients like to run with findings and, try to make them apply to the whole world, but you can always go, this is directional. This isn't so significant because of XYZ reason. And I'm wondering, like, I don't know, but due to like AI moderation, what are the limitations that we have to kind of help them understand as experts? Like, it can do this, but it really is not good at that. When we're looking at these findings, don't look at it as if there was a human moderating, these respondents. It was AI, and therefore these limitations. Like, I don't know what those are, but I'd be curious to try to figure out what that is so we can kind of sit those findings in a place that makes sense given what this tool is capable of doing. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And I think the limitations, might come down to like I think it does come down to what the subject matter, what were we learning? I think, if it's a very, we've got a concept A or B, and which one did they let? I think the limitation is that we just it's a matter of how deep you can go beneath the surface, and whether or not we have like voice to get a sense of the emotional cadence with which their reactions were happening or not. Like if we're just looking at essentially like AI analysis or even a human reading text, that's the flattening. That's where we just don't, like, words can only do so much. But then when we have the emotional layer or the video, like the way I'm talking with my hands, and now so that's where we have to be super mindful of that. And then yeah, I think the idea of, was it panel or not? Because I know that if it's human qual recruited, I know I can vouch a lot more for those people. Not that every once in a while someone doesn't slide in, but I know they've really been vetted and validated, usually by me, like each human, 100% vetted and validated. So I think those are really the big things. And then again, it's all the things that weren't said and weren't elevated in those conversations. It's all every choice that AI didn't necessarily make in the moment that we as human, like that's the part that, where I kind of had that slide about no amount of analysis can ever go back and resurface, right? Those moments are gone. And so, but there are times, where depending on the use case, like it can be.
I think it really harkens that whole idea of, I'm sure this has happened to all of us that are here, when a client at the end of a project says, wow, we learned so much more than we thought we were going to. And so now how do we bring those conversations up front? Because a lot of times I think they already know what they're going to find out. And so to help them realize there's so much more here, and please don't be sloppy about how you structure or plan this, because there's a lot of human richness. And Lauren, you've made us all see it's not a straightforward yes, no kind of conversation. It's layered, it's nuanced, and we really need to be engaging with people, maybe even before they ask for a project, have these dialogues happening so that they know who to come to and have the conversation, when the need arises. Exactly. So again, Lauren, I want to thank you so much for generously sharing not just your presentation, but the experience and all of this conversation. This was indeed a deep dive discussion. This was number 38. We have many more to come, but this was great. And we're very grateful to you for doing an encore presentation. Some people have seen it before.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was an honor. Thank you guys, for those of you that are still here and staying to the bitter end. There's lots more, and I just want to encourage you all, like you too can, explore some of these tools. I think my big thing is we don't always have to wait for clients to commission something. If we're curious with the tech out there nowadays, like, pick something you care about and run your own research on research project and see. And I'm happy to talk to people. I just think that that's something I know. I mean, I'm just slower these days, so it's just a luxury at times.
We'll start the conversation with clients and then get them to be the patronage.
Yeah. Exactly.
Thanks very much, Lauren.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Happy Friday, everyone.